So this is the area behind the Temple of Saturn. That's the Temple of Saturn. There it is, there it is. Saturn is Kronos, for those of you who don't know. So the Temple of Saturn is not archaic. It was built in the first year of the Republic in 498 BCE. There is potentially an altar in the Temple of Saturn, but we will talk about that later. So the Temple of Saturn is at the base of the Capitoline Hill, and it was known as the Mons Saturnium because that's what the Capitoline Hill was known as. It was known as the Mountain of Saturn in textual evidence, and it's supposedly known as that because while the Latins lived on the Palatine, the Sabines lived on the Capitoline, and they were said to worship Saturn as one of their main gods. I think Ennius says this, maybe Livy, I feel like Tacitus, I don't know, all those guys, they kind of write about this. And supposedly, you know, the people who lived on this hill on the Mons Saturnium totally practiced human sacrifice until Hercules came along and was like, nah bruh, human sacrifice is not cool, I'm gonna show you how to sacrifice properly. And they were all like, oh, no way, we can just give the burnt offerings to the gods, you're kidding. That's definitely what happened. I don't know about you guys, but Portico of the Harmonious Gods sounds like the biggest load of BS I've ever heard, especially because it's about the Olympians. Okay, so according to the sign, the temple existed from the late 6th century BCE, but I have a feeling they are talking about the altar to Saturn. So here they probably think that the altar is under the temple, but I'm going to show you guys an alternate for where the temple, sorry, the altar could be. An alternate for the altar. Alright, so one more note on Roman religion. The Temple of Saturn also had, so Saturn's consort was considered Ops and for the Romans, unlike the Kronos-Rhea dichotomy. Ops isn't always considered to be Rhea, but Dionysus of Halicarnassus thinks she is. But basically it means that in the Roman Forum, the first gods we have present are Ops, Saturn, Mars, Dis Pater, and Vesta. And while all of these other than Ops have a Greek equivalent, the origin of these gods, Roman-wise, actually comes from Italic and Sabine cultures and the Etruscans rather than necessarily the Greek additions, which were merged into the Roman versions of the gods at a later date, probably somewhere in the Republic. So what we're dealing with is not only dealing with very earthly gods compared to sky gods, you know, the guys up on the Capitoline, Jupiter, Minerva, Juno, all those guys, but we have a very underworldly group as well. So it's interesting to think about why these gods were here. Technically we are lower down in the Roman Forum, so it's interesting to think that because we are physically lower, we have the earthly gods here rather than on the Capitoline. But I think that's a matter of opinion. I'm just pointing out a cool thing. Okay, so here we are at one of the oldest and my favorite parts of the Roman Forum. This, you can ignore this sign, just don't listen to the sign at all. This is potentially the altar to Saturn. This is a hewn block of tufa with a little step that represents an archaic altar. It is either the Vulcanal or the Ares Saturni, the altar to Saturn. I don't think it's the Vulcanal, and I can explain why in a second, but this is one of the oldest things in the Roman Forum. I know it doesn't look like much, but trust me, it is really cool. Now, why I think it's the altar to Saturn is because the Temple of Saturn is right over there, if you want to show. That's where the Temple of Saturn is. And in textual evidence, the altar to Saturn is always listed as being next to or in front of the temple. And I don't know about you, but that's the temple, and this is the altar, and that's pretty dead on. So that's just my personal opinion. It's also possibly the Vulcanal because the area right behind us is potentially the Graecostasis, which is a really old Republican kind of speaking platform that was then later replaced by the Rostra. And the Vulcanal is considered to be the exact same location as the Graecostasis. So if that's the Graecostasis and this is the Vulcanal, then we're set. But I think the Vulcanal is behind the Graecostasis on the other side of it. Also, I just really like Saturn, and this should totally be an altar to Saturn. There's some sort of, I can't see them right now, but actually if you come here without treading on any rocks, there is a depression on the far side of the altar that is potentially for where you would put offerings, but this, because it's lower down and then you've got the altar here, would be the front of the altar. We might be missing bits and pieces, who knows? But the monument next to the Ars Eterni is also super interesting. I'll come on the other side of you. This is called the Umbilicus Urbis Romae, and it is an omphalos, which is kind of like a navel. It's like your belly button. Okay, this is the belly button of Rome, and it's a 3rd century, it's the 2nd or 3rd century AD, so CE monument. But there's textual sources which talk about the Vulcanal or the Ars Eterni being really close to a Sakellum of Hades, Dis Pater. And here we have an underground shrine, which, as we talked about for the circus, is something that is pretty underworldly and pretty much related to Hades. One could say it is even chthonic, which is my favorite word. Another cool thing about this monument is that it was also potentially a grain storage area. So if you imagine that the Temple of Saturn doesn't exist and all we have is the altar to Saturn, Saturn is a archaic, chthonic god of agriculture. So it would make sense to have a grain storage right next to an altar of an agricultural god. And this theory is not commonly accepted. As you can see, the people who look after the Roman Forum believe it is the Vulcanal. You can believe what you want, but I personally like the idea that it is the altar to Saturn and a potential structure which now takes the place of a granary and a Sakellum to Hades. Okay, so I forgot to mention this thing is called a mundus, and not only was it a grain storage, which makes it chthonic because it's partially underground, but according to this wonderful plaque, apparently there is a crack in the ground that was meant to act as a pathway between it and the underworld. I feel like a crack in a grain storage is a really terrible idea, but even if it's not a Sakellum to Dis, it is still considered a pathway to the underworld, and that is awesome. A nice outside view of the forum. There's the Curia, and here's some Roman shit. Adding to the chthonic nature of oh my god, I almost said Satan. This is not the Temple of Satan, this is the Temple of Saturn. Anyway, so adding to that, it was also the treasury. So money was stored underneath the temple. You literally cannot get any more chthonic than that. This is supposedly the altar in 700 BCE that Hercules was like, yo, don't kill people. And he built this for them. Okay, so unfortunately we can't get close to the lapis niger. There used to be like a glass here that you could see in, but I guess not. The lapis niger is it's 50 BC or CE, and it was a giant black rock which was covering some of the archaic monuments in front of the Curia, which is here. Supposedly the shrine to Vulcan is here rather than where the apparently supposed shrine of Vulcan is that we just went to. There was also supposedly the grave of Romulus, but also maybe Faustulus, but also maybe, you know, like Tullius Hostilius, I don't really know. But the shrine that's supposedly to Vulcan is it's super archaic, and it looks exactly like ones that you find in Lavinium from the archaic period, and it's really nice, and I wanted to show it to you guys, but I guess I can't. There's also a really cool Sippus that was found here that's no longer here, it's in the museum, and it's the oldest Latin inscription. It's really archaic Latin, it's really difficult to read, and it talks about kingship, but I guess we can try and go find that in the museum. I'm really bummed about this actually. The shrine's really cool, and that's sad times. So anyway, the reason that I think this is the Vulcanal rather than the other one is because it's right in front of the Curia, and the Curia is like the meeting house, and it's always been in this area. And supposedly Romulus was killed in the Vulcanal, which was meant to be the Comitium Curia area, which is exactly here. So, you know, I wish I could show you guys more, but that's my reasoning, slash some other people's reasoning. And yeah. This is the coolest thing in the Roman Forum. Here's the Arch of Septimius Severus, like it's okay, I guess. at the forum, I'm at the Palatine, I'm at the combination forum and Palatine. Hey!